Oh, letting people in. Shalom Lekulam. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. Welcome to the latest in our series of Zoom events in English on a Wednesday. As usual, I think we have people joining us from Israel, the United States, Europe, South Africa, maybe, given the topic of this lecture in this series, maybe also Asia as well. Welcome, and I hope this is as interesting and informative as all our previous sessions have been. For those of you that are new to this format, the way it's going to work is I'm going to speak for about half an hour with our guest, and then the floor will be open, metaphorically, for you to ask your questions by writing them in the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can write them in at any point during proceedings, and I'll make a note of them and put them to our guest, as many as we can fit in the time that we have. Okay, so this, for those of you that have been with us for a while, you'll know that here on this series, what we've been trying to do is look at various aspects of both Israeli politics and also Israeli policy. The challenges facing Israeli decision makers, both domestically and internationally. And what I think has happened in this series, as I think happens probably in most educational or informational formats of this kind, is that there's a focus on the United States, for obvious reasons, and also Europe. And what I wanted to do with this series that we're starting today is look at Asia, the world's largest continent, and a continent that Israel is increasingly involved in and has an increasing interest and foreign policy imprint in. And so over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be speaking to a selection of experts and Israeli diplomats, and we're going to be really looking at how both of the contemporary situation, how Israel is operating in these countries and that part of the world, and also a little bit of the history of how we got to this point, and also, of course, looking ahead to the challenges. So we're going to start with really, I think, obviously one of the largest countries in Asia and the world, the second largest country in the world, India, in terms of population, and a country that Israel has increasingly in recent years become an important ally of and developed a very close relationship with. Some of you will remember the famous pictures of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi walking on the beach together, which got a lot of press attention, and they really, aside from the sort of, I guess, kitsch value, they really did represent, I think, an important sign that there was a growing closeness between these two countries, and we're going to have a look at why and how today with a very special guest joining us from New Delhi, a senior Israeli diplomat, Mrs. Rony Yedidia-Clein, who's been in New Delhi since August 2020 to begin her tenure as deputy ambassador there. She began her diplomatic career in 1994 as a member of the prestigious diplomatic cadets course, specializing in administrative affairs. She has previously served as consul in the Consulate General of Israel in Istanbul, as director of administration in the Embassy of Israel in Moscow, as deputy consul general at the Consulate General of Israel to New England, and as Minister Counsel for Public Diplomacy at the Embassy of Israel in London. Also held a variety of positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Jerusalem, as well as a tenure as foreign policy advisor to the Ministry of Culture. She has a BA in English Literature from Tel Aviv University, an MA in American Studies from the Hebrew University, and also an additional MA in Public Policy, also from the Hebrew University. It's my great pleasure to welcome Rony Yedidia-Clein, Deputy Ambassador. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start with a sort of general question. I think looking at Israel and India, one way of looking at it would be to see this, this tiny country of less than 10 million people and this giant of over 1 billion people, and say, not exactly round the corner from each other either, looking at a globe. What's the impetus for this growing relationship? Can you tell us a little bit about how and why this relationship has developed as it has over recent years?
Well, I think if you look at the numbers, the two countries together make up about 20% of the world. So it's pretty good numbers wise. And what I've found here is that the Indians have a great admiration for Israeli innovation, for Israeli capabilities, and for the way that we, in more or less the same time frame as they have, we have become what they consider very much a leader on the world stage. They see us, although we are by size different, they do see us as equals in terms of leading the world. They see Israel as a country that is very much leading both in innovation, leading in on the world political stage in very many ways. And so this has become a very, very close relationship over, particularly over the past 30 years since we've had diplomatic relations. We did have a form of relations before the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1992. Those are mostly based on very below-the-radar security cooperation. And also we had a consulate since the 1980s in Mumbai. But over the past 30 years, those relations have really grown in both scope and visibility as far as the Indians are concerned. And this is something that's very important to both countries.
And what would you say are we, if the relationship is about, essentially national interests, theirs and ours, what are we getting out of it and what are they getting out of it, bluntly?
Well, we're getting out of it, first of all, an important partner in the world stage. They are currently in the Security Council, in the UN Security Council, and they're helping us there. They are our partners in very many things around the world, which don't necessarily make the headlines, but they are important to us, such as the UN and other international organizations. We're also getting out of it an important market, which, when we speak frankly, that's something that's important to all countries, and this is a huge market. We are getting out of it an important partner. Speaking of the market, the trade between the two countries in a normal year, let's talk about 2019, because 2020 is not a normal year, obviously, was about $4 billion, fairly equally. Maybe they have a little bit more of an advantage over us, but not something significant. And that's $4 billion when we're without talking about security trade products. When we bring in those products from our various military industries, we have another $1.5 billion worth of trade, which is us selling to the Indians. So we're getting a very good deal here, and I think both sides see the advantages of this relationship.
Right. I mean, one I was going to say security. It seems to me that security is one area where there could definitely be something where there definitely could be something to talk about in terms of, we all know Israel's um, geographic situation, the neighborhood we're situated in, and of course, India has a neighbor with whom it has been in a state of hostility with. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there, even down to the question of partition. And they were, I think, the year before us in 1947, the establishment of India and Pakistan. And to what extent is India interested in Israel's advanced security technology and expertise?
It's very much interested. It's this is a big part of our trade with them, and it's interested in our advanced technologies, both on the security side and also on the civilian side. We're talking with them also about a variety of different technologies that are used for both security needs and for civilian. We're not talking with them about civilian drones and things like that. The thing is that it's a growing field. It's becoming more and more varied in terms of what the Indians are interested in that we can provide them.
And when I think of the whole question of terrorism and the fact that Israel has seen itself as being on the front line of the threat of Islamist terror, which then became a global problem about 20 years ago, almost exactly 20 years ago, I guess. Does India recognize a sort of shared enemy in terms of Pakistan being a Muslim country with also, unfortunately, a record of support for and sympathy with various terrorist groups?
Well, when we talk to them about our terror concerns, they tell us we're on the same page. We have the same problems in terms of being surrounded on various sides by countries that wish us ill. They have been experiencing over the past several weeks and months a sort of insurgent from the northwest of terror attacks, which are not quite as big as some of the attacks that we have experienced over our time, but there have been attacks over the past several weeks that are of a lot of concern here, and this is something that isn't new. It's it's resurging now, but it's something that's not new, that they have known over the years, and so they do sympathize with us on our concerns here.
Okay, and how much, when we think about the relationship, as I said, there's the picture of Modi and Netanyahu, and I think again, looking from the outside, it seems that a lot of credit should go to former Prime Minister Netanyahu for building up that relationship, and he seemed to establish a close personal relationship with Prime Minister Modi. How much is there any concern that the sort of the change in leadership here could affect the relationship that goes deeper than any kind of personal relationship between the prime ministers?
I think it's much deeper than any personal relationship at this point. We should remember that the deepening of the relationship actually started during Shimon Peres's time as foreign minister, and this isn't something that is dependent on any one person. I got a lot of that question back when the new government was formed. Is the relationship going to stay the same, or is there something that we should be worried about? And I have not seen any sign that there is any lessening. Actually, quite the opposite. We've been getting a much deeper relationship now. We actually have the foreign minister, he's called the Minister of External Affairs of India, visiting Israel next week, which we hadn't had a high-level visit since, in fact, Netanyahu was here 3 years ago. And so this is something that's a sign of the deepening of the relationship. Next year, as I mentioned before, we will be celebrating 30 years of diplomatic relations between our two countries. And what both sides are expecting is that there will be high-level visits on both sides. So I don't think that there would be any change, certainly not for the worst. If anything, it'll be a change for the better, because the relationship will be getting stronger and deeper, more intimate. I mean, I'm looking at the plans for next week's visits, and it's going to be a very, very good visit in terms of the intimacy, the different things that Dr. Jaishankar will be seeing in Israel. It's really quite amazing, and I expect the same thing for next year. We're really hoping. And we're working with the Indians on mutual visits, reciprocal visits, both at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, to sort of frame this year of celebrations. And we see a lot of really interesting things going forward.
That's great. That's really encouraging. I mean, just for those people on the call who are less familiar with Indian politics, the current Prime Minister is from the BJP party, which is the right-wing party, and I guess a little bit like Israel, India was dominated for years by one party, which was the sort of founding party of the state, the Congress Party of Nehru and Gandhi and others, and then there was this sort of Mapach, Indian Mapach, with the BJP, I think in the 2000s or the 90s, coming to power, when Sharon was Prime Minister, I think.
Right. So the BJP came into power, if I'm not mistaken, in the 2000s, more or less, and Modi. He came in 2014, and he's very, very pro-Israel, and he's
right. So really, so that's very clear. But I wonder whether because as you said, the initial diplomatic relations actually started 30 years ago, and when Peres was Prime Minister, and then Congress were in power, right?
Right.
So we can be reasonably confident that even though the BJP it seems to be more sort of overtly and very strongly pro-Israel, that things wouldn't slip back significantly if there were a change of government in India.
Yeah, I'm fairly confident of that. We see the popular support here. If Twitter is any sort of a measure, I have to say that our popularity here, the support that we get on social media and in the streets, is really quite remarkable. I can say here when I go into a shop or whatever that I'm from Israel, and I don't have to worry about someone putting a knife in my back or anything like that, God forbid. But they're very, very pro-Israel. We get a lot of support. Whenever I say I'm from Israel, people are always happy to hear about it. They tell me how they want to go and visit Israel. They tell me how much they love Israel. And so if the popular support is a measure of how the government is going to go, then any government that comes into power here will have to support Israel.
Wow, that's amazing. To what do you attribute that? Why do you think that the general public feels so warmly towards us? I mean, it's great, but
because of the support that we've given them over the years. It started, we can even say, in the 1990s, when there was an operation called Kargil here, an operation between India and Pakistan, and we were the only country in the world to actually come to India's help, and we supplied them with military equipment and materials, and we actually helped them quite a bit, and they remember that. And over the years, as I said, there has been the various security cooperations, but there's also been other cooperations. Just in the past year, we have brought in two major operations of assistance for their fight against COVID. When we were, I came in on a special. I came to India for the with my husband and our dog on a special flight that brought in equipment and testing equipment and people to help out here last July. We had another very big assistance operation where we brought in 60 tons of equipment, which included oxygen generators and oxygen concentrators and other equipment back in April. And that got a lot of exposure, and it helped us get a lot of support, popular support here. We have people who come here all the time. We have been working on an agricultural project for the last, I think it's over 10 years already, where we've built 30 agricultural centers of excellence around the country. These are centers of excellence through which about 2 million farmers have passed through in order to learn about new modern Israeli methods of growing their produce, making their farms produce more products and more cash for them. This has helped the Indian economy, and we have 12 more of these centers in the pipeline, and the Indians know about this. They're scattered all around the country, and the Indian population knows about these centers of excellence, with which we have been helping the Indian farmer, and we have been helping them with food security. We're working now on a water project in one of the most neglected regions of India, called Bundelkhand. And we're working there. The Israeli government is working on a project there in order to bring water to these people who live in this area who don't have running water in their homes. So Israel has really been doing an enormous amount to help India, and the Indian people are appreciative of that.
Well, you when you mentioned this warm welcome that you get everywhere walking in the streets and telling people you're Israeli, I couldn't help but think about how that might contrast to your last diplomatic posting in London, where that might have been, you might have received a less positive response, at least from certain, at least you couldn't be sure that you would receive a less positive response, and I wonder, and you also, as noted when I read out your little bio at the beginning, you were also served in the United States for a while. How different is it? I mean, how do you feel that difference being in a country which, I guess, doesn't have a substantial Jewish community, and you can tell me about the Jewish community, but also doesn't have, I don't think, the whole issue which occupies so many of us coming from Europe and North America, the whole question of anti-Zionism and BDS and defending Israel on campus and all this kind of stuff. That's entirely absent, right?
It's mostly absent. Put it that way. We don't have BDS here, and anti-Semitism almost doesn't exist. To be honest, there are some universities which lean more to the left, and where we do have a little bit more of a problem, but we don't have the cancel culture here that you have in the United States. We don't have that feeling that we can't go on stage in the universities here. We do work with the universities. We do have Israeli lecturers come and talk there, and we do have programs working together with them. Indian students are a big part of the foreign students population in Israel. I think they're actually the biggest percentage of foreign students in Israel, and they want to go and study in Israel, which is something that we don't see quite as much in other countries. In the UK, it was a struggle to get British students to come and study in Israel. In the US also, Indian students, those who have the capability, want to come and study in Israel. So, and another thing is that there's hardly any anti-Semitism in here. I mean, there isn't anti-Semitism. One thing that I would sort of mention is that we do see the book Mein Kampf on sale here, and there's an interesting attitude towards Hitler and towards World War II. They're not aware of the Holocaust. They're not aware of what Hitler did. They see him as a strong man, and that's something that we see as a problem. And we're trying to work with the Indian government to educate the population about the Holocaust, about what Mein Kampf means. So that's something that, yes, it is a bit of a problem as far as we see it, but it's not anti-Semitism per se.
Right.
It's more a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think, we tend to be so, I mean, speaking for myself and maybe for others on this call, like we tend to be so with our heads looking at the West and with our heads in that sort of Western world with the history that we're all familiar with, and we sort of forget about the large portion of the world. In fact, most of the world, given that it includes both India and China, most of the world that doesn't share that history and that sort of way of thinking. I'm interested, actually, before I ask this question, I want to just say to people on this call, I'm going to conclude my questions soon, so I want you guys to start writing in questions. Otherwise,
they already have started.
Otherwise, I'm going to continue, and Rony will just get bored with my questions. When you mentioned about the fact that you are working with the universities and going to talk to students there, that's interesting, because again, my mind goes to the job of Israeli embassies and consulates in places like the UK and the United States, where a lot of that exchange with students is about, what we might call hasbara, or explaining the conflict and defending Israel against accusations of apartheid and all this kind of stuff. And I guess you're from what you say, that's not what you're doing at universities, or is that part of it?
Much less. What we talk about, and frankly, over the past year and a bit that I've been here, we've been talking over Zoom to students. We haven't actually had a physical visit to a university. But for example, I've spoken about women's issues in Israel. I've spoken about innovation in Israel. I've spoken about things along those lines, which is, that's what my French and Dutch colleagues talk about as well. They talk about women and innovation and these things that come out of their countries, and not about any conflicts, and that is what makes it, I don't know if more interesting, but more enjoyable.
Okay, great. Okay, so what I think we'll do is, Rony, you shared with me a short promotional video, which we're going to share with everyone now. It's a few minutes, do you want to introduce it? This is produced by the embassy.
Yeah, so this is just a short video that we produced at the end of last year to show the activities that the embassy had done over the year. We were actually, when we came to sort of do a stock taking at the end of the year, as one does, we found that despite Corona, despite the lockdown that had happened in India, despite all of the bad things that happened in 2020, and I don't think any one of us looks fondly back at 2020, we did look back and see that we had accomplished quite a lot. And we were actually very proud of everything that we've been able to accomplish during the year. And so my team put together this little video, which we shared on social media. And I hope you enjoy this for the next 2.5 minutes, I think it is.
Okay, so we're going to watch that, and then we'll come back and answer some of your questions. Okay. Fair. Great. Okay, I think that oh, I'm sorry. Let's see if we can. Oh. Okay, let's get to some questions. And there was a question here from Shmuel, who wants to ask, what are your expectations in relation to future relations of India with Israel and Russia, especially in the background of the political conflict between India and China, and keeping good relations with Israel and Russia, both? Quite convoluted. I guess
I'm not sure I understand the question. We have bilateral relations with both countries. Our bilateral relations with Russia are fair to good, I would say, but I really don't know. I'm not. I served in Russia 15 years ago, if more, even more. I really haven't been following things between Israel and Russia lately. And
I mean, what the one bit of the question that I think I understood was with regard to China, that there does seem to be there has been recent tension between India and China, and obviously Israel's relationship with China is also complicated by the fact that the United States isn't too happy about certain aspects of that. So does that play into does the Israel-China relationship at all play into our relationship with India? Does it get in the way in some way?
No, I don't think it does. When we talk with the Indians do ask here and there about our relations with China. The things that they ask about are asked in closed rooms, and I won't go into those discussions. But there in no way affects the relations between our two countries, the bilateral relationship at all. It's the relationship with China, as you say, is complicated, and the relationship between India and China is also complicated. They, on the one hand, see them as a rival in the region. On the other hand, they are probably their greatest trade partner for India. So, you know, it's not an easy relationship, I suppose, and it's complicated by Chinese ambitions, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Okay.
But you know, these are China and Russia are both superpowers. India sees itself as an emerging superpower, and the relationships between superpowers are never simple.
Yes, that is right. That is of course the case. Okay, there's a question here which, I mean, you'll decide how much you're comfortable answering this, but there's a question about the parameters of your job, of your role. There's Isabel she's basically expressing, I think, some relatively common criticisms of India, I guess, that it's done a poor job of promoting women's education, that Modi himself has come under a lot of criticism for a perceived anti-Muslim agenda. And the question is, do you ever touch on these issues? Is that something that Israel is going to get involved in, either women issues or the questions of the India's Muslim minority, especially, she says, since Israel is sharing technology with India?
Right. So we do have outreach to the Muslim community, mostly in the public diplomacy sphere. We work with imams on various issues. We try to work with various NGOs on various issues. As for women's issues, this is something that I'm trying more and more to get involved in. It's something that I see as extremely important here. Women in India. It's really very interesting because on the one hand you see some very strong women, you see some women in very important positions. On the other hand, there are women here who are women and girls who are in very vulnerable positions, and there is really a lot of suffering and problems. And I'm actually, tomorrow we're holding an event at the embassy for my fellow women diplomats in order to put together a network of women diplomats and see how we can work together between our different countries in order to try to help Indian women and girls. It's something that I place a lot of importance on. This event tomorrow is one of our public diplomacy initiatives where we are working on. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and so we're doing something on that with an Israeli NGO, Echad Mitesha, 1 out of 9, and an Indian NGO, and bringing in a speaker, and then that'll also be part of the launch of the Diplomatic Women's Network, which I hope will be able to do some good for Indian women and girls.
Wow, that's really amazing. That's really impressive. I'm wondering, maybe, I guess not unconnected to the issue facing some women in parts of India. There are some parts of India which are really desperately poor, right? It's a very there's really a modern India.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I spoke about that earlier with our water project, for
yeah,
example.
right. So yeah, is that I was going to say, like, Israel does have this great record of being a country that's assisted. I don't know whether, I guess India wouldn't want to see itself as, I don't know whether it defines itself as a developing. It's kind of strange, right? It's sort of, it has this extreme poverty, but it's also this modern, democratic country. Is Israel, does it welcome Israeli assistance in these things? Is it a bit sort of, does it feel a little embarrassed about it?
So we have to define it correctly.
Right.
We don't. We don't.
Diplomatically.
That's part of being a diplomat. We don't
Right.
define it as assistance. We define it as cooperation. We work
Right.
together with the Indians. We don't pour money onto the Indian population. I don't think it would be responsible to do that, and I don't think, and that's not something the Indians want. The Indians don't see themselves as an aid-receiving country. They see themselves as an aid-giving country, and they do, in fact, give aid to their neighbors. And we cooperate with them. I mentioned before our big agriculture and water projects. These are projects that we are cooperating with the Indians on. They're actually paying for most of it. When we have a center of excellence, it's Israeli know-how, Israeli technologies, and Indian money, which is putting together the center of excellence. When we're talking about our water project, this is something that the two prime ministers in their meetings in 2017 and 2018 placed great importance on. And so we have Israeli know-how. We actually brought in an Israeli diplomat whose focus is water. He's a hydrologist, a doctor of hydrology, and he's here as a diplomat now. He's giving his know-how. The Indians will be putting in the money for any projects going forward. He's more of an advisory role than a giving, building or giving any sort of money.
Yeah.
He's here working with them in order to build a program that will help them with water. So when we're talking about the assistance that Israel gives India, it's assistance in the form of cooperation, it's assistance in the form of know-how and technologies and everything that Israel is very good at. We don't have the money ourselves to help 1,400,000,000 people come out of poverty, but we have the know-how to help them out.
Great. Okay. So Stephen Nadler asks about how the rivalry between Pakistan and India affects Israel's relations with both countries. Now, if I could just expand on that, obviously we don't have a relationship with Pakistan, but I'm wondering, and this maybe sort of builds on Stephen's question, we are kind of entering this strange and unknown new world where we're entering into relations with Muslim countries that we didn't previously have relations with. And is there any scenario that you see where maybe if the Saudis got on board or something like that, where Pakistan might be sort of pushed into, at the very least, even slightly opening its doors a little bit to Israel, and then that could either affect the relationship with India, or that India would push back on that. Is that even come up in the wake of the Abraham Accords and the possibilities of new openings in the Muslim world?
Well, the Indians have been very admiring of the Abraham Accords. They see this as a very positive development in our region, and actually is an opportunity for them as well, because since they have very strong economic partnerships with the Gulf states, and so they see this as an opportunity for three-way cooperation, and we've already started to see three-way deals coming together between the countries. So I don't think that they would look negatively on any sort of development like Stephen is suggesting. Unfortunately, over the past year since the Abraham Accords have started, we haven't seen any sign of such a development coming from Pakistan. But I don't believe this is something that would harm our relationship with India. I think India has diplomatic relations with Pakistan. They're not the warmest of relations. They are, fairly guarded, but they see them as a neighbor that they have to work with, and I don't think that this would harm our relationship at all.
That's also very interesting, I think, to note maybe that it's maybe not so obvious to all of us that the sort of cold peace, or whatever you want to call it, between India and Pakistan hasn't prevented India from having very close relationships with other Muslim countries, right? So Shmuel asks, can India support in any form Israeli-Palestinian normalization? I don't know. I'm not sure whether Shmuel is asking for. Do they take a position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Do they decide that it's not something they want to get involved in?
Their statements are always that they do support a two-state solution and that they support the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Okay.
This is their constant statement. Actually, in the UN Security Council, just a week or so ago, they added to their sort of standard statement about supporting an independent Palestinian state and the two-state solution. They also added something about acts of terror, which should not be. What was the word? I don't remember exactly the word that they used, but condemning acts of terror between from the Palestinian side to Israel. So they have traditionally supported the Palestinians. What we are very happy about, actually, is that one of the developments of the past couple of decades is that, or of, I guess, Modi's government, is that they have declared a de-hyphenization of their relationship with Israel and with the Palestinians. That is, before, there was always a sacred balance between Israel and the Palestinians. If they did anything towards Israel, they would have to balance it with something towards the Palestinians. And it was always hyphenized. Today there is de-hyphenization, and their relationship with Israel has nothing to do with their relationship with the Palestinians. And we can see that in Dr. Jaishankar's visit next week. He's visiting only Israel, and he will not be visiting the Palestinian Authority, which is something that we very often see with our European friends, that if they come to Jerusalem, they have to visit Ramallah as well. And there is that hyphenization of the official relationship. Here, it doesn't exist.
That's really interesting, huh? That's an interesting thing. I actually had a question myself about the foreign minister's visit, but I want to, before I get to that, I'll do another question from our audience. Stephen asked whether Israel is monitoring the Deobandi Islamist group in India. I'm not sure. Stephen, maybe you can write in the chat and tell us more about it. I'm assuming it's an Islamist group. It's a sort of, what is it? Sort of a Al-Qaeda type group. Maybe you can write in the chat and let us know. In the meantime, a question that I had about the visit next week is when you say that he's going to be visiting lots of, you said it's a very you were very encouraged by what he's going to go and see. Can you give us a window into his itinerary? What's he going to be doing that you think that fills you with such optimism?
Well, just one example is a visit to the Old City with a tour guide that the MFA will be providing. Whenever we have had visits by foreign dignitaries from Europe who do go to the Old City, they're guided by someone who is brought in from their consulates in Jerusalem, which, as you know, are not consulates to the Israeli government. And so they see a very specific picture there. When he visited Mexico a month or so ago, I think it was, and he was very impressed by ancient civilization sites that he saw there. And I reported this to our headquarters, and I said, when he visits Israel, we should make sure that he sees sites which will show him the connection between the land of Israel and the Jewish people. And so this is one thing that he will be seeing that I guess I had a small part in, and that we're very pleased that this is the way it's going. I mean, it could have, it could have been organized differently, and we're very pleased with the way that it's being organized.
That's really amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. As I said, we tend to think of Israel's relations with the West, but actually, in a strange way, the fact that places like India and China have these ancient civilizations gives them a sort of connection with Israel, if you like. That we're also an ancient civilization which is still going. Albeit we had a long period of time when we were homeless, but we have this. That there is an ancient land and an ancient people who lives on the land in the same way as you have, I guess, with Indians. That's very interesting. Okay, let's go back to the questions. So Stephen is clarifying about this Islamist group. He said they may be connected to the bombing, the Mumbai bombing of the Jewish Center a few years ago. They're similar to Wahhabi Islam, and they support the Taliban as well. Is this something you're familiar with? Or maybe let's broaden it out to, is there a general sort of thread of Islamist terror in India that Israel is monitoring?
It's not something that we at the embassy bring to the... it's not something that I could talk about.
Okay, fair enough. There's Marion is sort of I guess it's words of hope and encouragement for you to move on these issues helping women. She said that when she was in India, she'll never forget the sight of women working on the road in unhygienic conditions, with no safety precautions in polluted air and these kinds of things. She thinks there's a lot to do for women's rights, and she really hopes that you can make a difference in that regard. And she said she hopes that next week's visitors from India will be shown how women have entitlement and protection in Israel, and find it a good example to take home with them. So I think we can amend to that. Okay, so I'm going to ask one final question, and then I'm going to give, and people can use that time to ask a final question in the chat. One thing we didn't mention, or I mentioned it in passing, the Jewish community in India. There is one, right? But it's small. It's not very prominent. It's not something that most Indians are aware of. I guess in a population of 1.5 billion people, I guess they can get lost. But is the embassy? Does the embassy have relations with the Jewish community?
Yes, but actually it's more the consulate in Mumbai, because most of the Jewish community is in Mumbai. It's tiny. It's less than 5,000 people altogether. Most of them live in Mumbai. A few live in Pune, which is a city close by to there. Some more live in Kochi. There are also the Bnei Menashe, who are a tribe from the northeast, who believe they are descended from one of the 12 tribes, and they have been slowly immigrating to Israel. So they're a very interesting group of people in themselves. They do see themselves as Jewish, but from I think it's First Temple or something like that. I'm not really sure. what the history of this group is. It's something that a group in Israel led by Michael Freund is working with in order to help them make Aliyah to Israel. So I think there were more Jews. The Jewish community was much larger. There was quite a big group, a big population in Kolkata. That's down to a couple of dozen at this point. And it was a very vibrant Jewish community. They were actually in two groups. One group which came a couple thousand years ago and came by on boats and landed in the Kochi area and were welcomed by the local kings and made to feel at home. Another group of Baghdadi Jews who came in the 18th century, I believe it was, and settled in Mumbai. They came for trade and commercial reasons. And I guess it must have gotten to about 20 or 25,000 at its height. Never suffered from anti-Semitism, never had any problems here. But they did, over the years, make Aliyah to Israel and move away. And so now it's really a tiny, tiny community.
I guess at least before in pre-COVID times, I guess the largest population of Jews at any one time were the visiting Israelis who were coming after the army, right? For
Right.
Okay. All right. I'm going to thank Deputy Ambassador Rony Yedidia-Clein very much for her time, especially as this is late in the evening for her. So we thank her very much for also giving us her time at a time when I'm sure she'd much rather just be putting her feet up and relaxing. But thank you so much, Rony, for your time and for answering our questions. Thank you, everyone. I'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about the development of Israel-Asia relations through an Israeli NGO called the Israel-Asia Center. We're going to be talking to the founder and executive director of that organization next week. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be speaking again with another Israeli diplomat in South Korea. So thank you, everyone. And I'll see you all hopefully next week. Bye, Rony. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.